So you guys are doing a great job and hanging in there with me right now. I know this is a difficult subject, and but again, you guys are doing great. So we're going to start this next section by talking about grief. And again, grief is something that it doesn't have to be just about death. It can be any kind of loss. This might sound silly. It might make me sound really nerdy, but I remember grieving being finished with the 6th grade. As I walked away from the school on that last day of school, I started getting really emotional and crying because I was leaving elementary school. And that had been just such a, I mean, you know, that's the first big piece of your life that's definitely about going to school, right? You're kind of told you're a big kid now because you get to go to school. And so I had a feeling of loss. I was going to lose those teachers that were familiar to me. How about have you ever lost a pet? Maybe it was just a goldfish, but you still felt that loss. And so those are all things that have to do with grief. Now, really fast, if you were wondering, hey, what is this week's incentive word? That is it. The word is grief. And I specifically chose grief this week as your incentive word because, you know what? It is something that we need to embrace sometimes, that we need to allow ourselves to go through whenever there's some kind of loss. It could be a loss of a job. It could be loss of a status. It could be loss of a relationship or a friendship. Like I said, it doesn't have to just be about death, but death definitely is a loss. And so we have to allow ourselves to go through the grieving process. There was an author by the name of Kubler-Ross who basically identified the 5 stages of grief. Okay, and so we're going to start with, well, the first one is denial, right? Denial. That might look like avoidance, confusion, shock, fear, elation. When that person says, hey, did you hear that so-and-so died? No. We don't want to believe it's true, right? Or sometimes, again, the loss is so sudden, we may be in shock for a while. That is part of it, but usually it quickly goes away and we are followed with the next 3 emotions. And these emotions, now, they have them in order here, but I will tell you, it's not like you graduate from one and congratulations, you get to go to the next stage. These stages tend to be very fluid. We go back and forth. We might just think, oh, I think I'm doing better, and then get triggered and go back to anger. And then we may go to bargaining, and then back to depression, and then back to bargaining, and then maybe back to anger. And so we just keep on going back and forth between these 3 feelings, these 3 emotions. Anger, again, can be frustration, irritation. It might look like anxiety. A lot of times people, you know, why did this have to happen? Why did I have to go through this? What, you know, and they just feel frustrated and angry at a situation. Of course, depression, that sadness. That also might look like hostility. That fight or flight response may have been triggered. The person might feel really overwhelmed. Bargaining is basically struggling to find meaning in the situation. Why did this person have to go so young? Why couldn't I have been the one to take their place? Why didn't I take them to the doctor sooner? Why didn't I go and talk to them more often? Why didn't I give them that phone call? And so a lot of the whys, and again, maybe if I would have, would be another bargaining sentence. But we go through these, and the goal is to get up here to acceptance. Now, here's the deal with acceptance. It doesn't mean that your grief goes away. I put it to like a wound. I once had this really bad wound on my knee. Like a piece of flesh had been just ripped out of it, and it was just nasty looking. Well, it took a while to heal, but once it healed, I had an ugly scar. Now, here's the question. It might be healed, but does that mean it never happened? No. It might be healed, but there's still a scar to remind me of what has happened. And that's what kind of acceptance in the grief process looks like. It doesn't mean that, okay, we're done with that. The person's gone. I don't have to think about it anymore. No, but it is about, you know what? I'm ready to continue to move forward. And once in a while, I still might be triggered. I know that for myself, I think I shared with you guys that my mother passed away about a year and a half ago. And you know what? Ever so often, I think, hey, I think I'm doing pretty good with it. And then a memory will show up, a dream will show up, maybe a weird holiday or something that I would have called her and told her. And that, even though I really have moved towards acceptance, it might bring me back to not depression, but sadness. If I think about things too much, sometimes I go to anger. But again, I get back to acceptance much more quickly now than I did a year and a half ago. And that's kind of how that process works. The one thing I tell people is that you definitely want to allow yourself to work through this process. Again, it's not that you graduate from one stage to the next, it is fluid. But by not allowing yourself, by trying to just shove it away and not deal with your grief, sometimes you'll get stuck in one of these areas. And being stuck there is never pretty. In fact, it's usually pretty destructive on the person. If you're stuck in your anger, well, then you just turn into an old bitter person, and we don't want that. Or a really depressed person who's stuck in their grief. Again, does that mean that they won't ever get depressed or angry? No, but we just don't want to be stuck in those places. Variations in grief, depending upon who has died and how the death occurred. Again, if maybe it was grandma, well, grandma may have lived a really long life, and even though we really loved her, we understand that that's a natural progression of life. But what if it is a child? What if it is maybe your parent or a spouse or a best friend? Your grief may feel more intense, the more intense the attachment. Sudden death versus prolonged death. A sudden death doesn't allow us always to say goodbye. A prolonged death, well, we may say goodbye, but we actually may have to say goodbye again and again. And that can also be difficult. So, again, is there a perfect way? There is not. Here's a critical thinking question for you. Why do you think men experience greater difficulties during bereavement? What else have you learned in this course that could help explain this pattern? Well, I wish we could have a discussion around this, and maybe this is what I will post for our discussion. But I want you to kind of think about what do we know between the differences between men and women? And these are, this of course is not written in stone, but men are not encouraged to be in touch with their feelings, are they? They're encouraged to kind of put their feelings aside and be rough and tough and big boys don't cry, and they're given these messages that just are not okay messages, but they're nonetheless the messages, unfortunately, that boys and men are given. And so when it comes time to grieve, well, they don't always feel comfortable doing that because they've never been allowed themselves to feel in the past. So, what are beliefs about death? Well, childhood, a lot of children believe, of course, death is permanent. Adolescents start to believe that death is inevitable. The full truth is often withheld, though, from children to protect them from fear and pain. I told you earlier that I had a cousin whose mom was really trying to protect her and wouldn't allow them to go to funerals or really to deal. I was the one who told them that our grandfather died because the mother didn't want to do that. Again, I think children, I understand that we want to protect them, but I think they can handle sometimes more than we give them credit for. So, adolescents also, their beliefs become more abstract and complex as they get older. If you remember when we talked about Erikson, they have formal operational thinking so they can think about the abstract. At this age, they start understanding religious concepts such as reincarnation, heaven and hell, existence of a soul that endures after death. So all abstract things that we don't necessarily see, but we can have a belief in our brain. Adults, then, we also have our own beliefs and fears, but they seem to change throughout time. Some people have great death anxiety. I was talking to somebody earlier who they just really struggled in dealing with even talking about death because they just wanted nothing to do with it. It caused them great anxiety. Death anxiety is usually highest in emerging adulthood, so right about where you guys are right now in age, early 20s, late teens. It also, though, tends to decline with age. People who, as they near the end of their lives, they seem to get more comfortable with the idea. I remember my grandmother talking, probably she died when she was almost 97, but starting in her mid to late 80s, she started talking about how, you know what, I'd be okay if I died. I wasn't planning on living this long. And she became much more comfortable with the idea or with the topic. Death anxiety is lowest in people who have strong religious faith, often because they believe that there's something better that they're going to. A wide range of beliefs of what happens after death. So we're going to talk about that. In the Jewish faith, many lack a clear-cut view of afterlife. The greatest fear of death than Christians, or greater fear than those of Christians. They do have a clear conceptual framework for afterlife that can be anchoring. Just so you know, some traditions that go with the Jewish faith. I don't know how to pronounce that, but Yar Retzit candle is lit for 24 hours, and prayers are recited three times a day after a person dies. Their eyes are closed, the body is covered and laid on the floor, and the body is not to be left alone. This is, of course, in an Orthodox Jewish situation. More of the unorthodox or the more liberal Jewish would probably do more of a westernized Christian funeral where they're not on the floor. Eating and drinking, though, often are forbidden in the same room along with flowers at the funeral. They feel like that is mocking the deceased. And then they sit Shiva. Sitting Shiva is sitting on a low stool or floor for several days. They're not allowed to work during this time. They're not allowed to bathe, shave, cut their hair, or wear cosmetics. I'm not sure about deodorant. I don't know if that's considered cosmetic. The Hindus believe in reincarnation. So at death, their deeds or karma determines what the next life will be. Followers work to break this cycle and find release. So their goal is spiritual perfection known as moksha. After their morning rituals, basically, a lamp is lit and incense is burned continually. Thumbs are tied together, as is big toes. Mirrors are covered. The body is cremated in an open fire. 12 hours later, the family collects the ashes and will scatter in a holy body of water along with flowers. Buddhists also believe in reincarnation. They believe the soul does not pass on to the next body, but using lessons you've learned in life will either find your way to heaven or continue down a path of reincarnation. So achieving nirvana will end suffering, and that is what enlightenment is. The Buddhist priest will usually take care of the body, chanting verse, bathing ceremony, placed in a coffin of flowers, candles, and incense. The majority of Japanese choose to be cremated within 3 days with Buddhist rites and have their ashes spread across the Buddhist cemetery. In the Islamic faith, they believe that their soul move on to the afterlife, well-being in this world and well-being in the hereafter. After death, body is reconfigured to stand before Allah for the day of judgment, and the soul is either sent to paradise or to hell. Their ritual is gathering near the deathbed and reciting the Quran. The body is bathed and burial takes place shortly after death. Cremation is forbidden in the Islamic faith. The body is laid on the right side and facing Mecca. There is a 3-day mourning period. Wives, though, are to grieve for 4 months and 10 days. This brings us to Christianity. They believe in an everlasting heaven or hell and is based on being forgiven for their sins by God. Catholics also believe in purgatory. So if you've not died in God's grace, they will be purified through prayers of others. And a lot of times that is through, like during the funeral, they have some rituals. In Christianity, a wake or visitation may occur the day before the funeral. Usually it's the night. Family members and friends gather to share remembrances. Bible verses are read. Sometimes there are open caskets or closed caskets. And the body can be buried or cremated in the Christian faith. Just kind of an interesting little note with the COVID-19 virus, because they are not allowed to have funerals right now, they are actually not embalming bodies, because there's no reason, nobody's going to see the body, so there's no reason to do that, to preserve the body. Why some non-religious people do not believe in life after death. This is kind of interesting, and maybe you find yourself in this category. If death is the end, these are some questions that they, or some beliefs that they have. If death is the end, then how can there be more? If there's more, then it's not the end, and therefore not death. There's no evidence for an afterlife. Some believe that religion offers no good reasons to believe in afterlife. Some believe that religious ideas may be harmful. Some believe that ideas about heaven and hell just might be made up. Mediums and other people who attempt to prove there's an afterlife might be by tricking people. In an age where science explains the world, we should not believe in things that are unscientific. Again, these are just different things that people who are non-religious might believe, because again, they don't agree with whatever religion is out there. So that is it for this chapter. That's it for really this class. I first of all just want you to know I've enjoyed having you guys. I'm sorry that we had to end our class online. I think the discussions in our class ended up being part of the learning process, and not having that was, I think, it shortchanged you guys. So I do apologize for that, even though it was beyond my control. Continue to work hard, continue to keep your focus. I will continue to give you reminders in the next couple weeks to hopefully that we can get everything in. I know there's a lot of work here at the end of the semester, but you guys are doing great. And so just keep up the good work and we will get through this, okay? And hopefully I'll see you guys around soon. So again, have a good week.